Welcome back, everyone, to episode 41 of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I am once again joined by my awesome co-host, Ryan Marister. Ryan, not too much to talk about this week. We got some NBA stuff to talk about. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, Ryan and I, for this podcast, to fill up the bulk of the time, have come up with our mid-season NBA awards. So basically, we're going to go through MVP, Coach of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Most Improved Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, surprise team of the year, and a team to watch out for the second half of the NBA season, which will be starting up again on this upcoming Wednesday. Ryan, I'm going to hand it off to you to get the podcast started.
Alrighty. Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, as you said, we're going to be doing our midseason awards for the NBA this year. We're doing this mostly because I think, Trevor, we have a lot coming up in this next week, right? And we're going to do a March Madness special with our special guest, Jack Eden, coming up next week. And we're also going to be doing pretty much an NFL free agency-centered episode next week as free agency opens. Trevor, I believe a week from today, it's around there, 6 or 7 days
17th,
from now.
I'm sure.
But I think the 15th is tampering. So
really 15 starts.
Yeah. So really a week. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about come next week's podcast. But we're going to jump right in here, Trevor, to these awards, if that's okay. And Trevor, I wanted to start off with Rookie of the Year, if that's okay with you. I wanted to start off small, okay? I wanted to start off with a smaller award. And this year, Trevor,
Perfect.
This award, I don't know, it seems different from past years because this draft class really, it hasn't been great, right? If I'm going to be honest, there hasn't been a lot there. But I wanted to ask you, Trevor, who is your Rookie of the Year? I mean, is there anyone that stands out?
It's fairly obvious. It's LaMelo Ball for me. He's averaging 16 points a game, over 6 assists, 45% shooting, 38% shooting from the three. He is one of the cornerstone pieces already as a rookie to Charlotte's success. They're a borderline playoff team as we start the second half of the season. And I think he brings out the best in other players, which is a unique skill that guys like LeBron James might have and other superstars. You know, a guy like Miles Bridges, his career seems to be a little bit revitalized by LaMelo Ball. Gordon Hayward's having a very, very underrated and solid year for the Charlotte Hornets. And other role players like that, I honestly feel like LaMelo Ball is bringing out the best in these guys. He's a great passer. He's becoming a pretty good shooter. I mean, 38% from three is pretty good among NBA standards. He's averaging 16 points a game. He's worked his way into the starting lineup, and he has more of an impact on his team than any other rookie in the NBA does on any of their teams. So for me, the Rookie of the Year award is honestly over. I don't see it changing in the second half of the season.
Wow.
I got LaMelo Ball winning this.
Yeah, see, that's definitely the obvious and I'd say the favorite argument right now, favorite player, obviously LaMelo Ball, but I'm going to go someone different, Trevor. And, you actually did predict what I was going to say off the air here, but I do think Tyrese Haliburton I think he could easily win Rookie of the Year this year. And I think it's easy to make the argument that he deserves it over LaMelo Ball, right? So I think that while LaMelo Ball's done great this year, Trevor, and he's come into the starting role, he's averaging 16 points a game, right? 6 boards, 6 assists.
Mm-hmm.
I think Haliburton is just as good, if not better, and he's much better on the offensive end, in my personal opinion. His percentages are better, 56% from the two inside the arc, whereas LaMelo is, I believe, 49%. And then Haliburton's also 43% from three, whereas LaMelo's 37%. So decent differences in percentages there. And Tyrese Haliburton also has a higher offensive rating than LaMelo Ball. So I just think that there's definitely an argument to be made for Haliburton to be Rookie of the Year. I think that while the Kings are the worst defensive team in NBA history, I don't think you can put that on a rookie, right? I don't think you can put that on a rookie like Haliburton. I think that's a bigger issue. So for me, when I'm looking at Rookie of the Year, Trevor, I'm really looking at, who is at the highest level to start their career. And right now, it's definitely a two-man's race, right? It's definitely a two-man's race between Ball and Haliburton. But to me, Haliburton is at a higher level on the offensive end right now. I think he's doing all this while being coming off the bench. He's not even starting. I think, when he starts filling into a starter role, I think he's going to improve on these already really solid, really good numbers. And I just think that Haliburton has a higher ceiling on the offensive end. But I do think it's important to note that LaMelo is winning games, right? He's winning more games. He's in the back end of the playoffs right now, Trevor. Haliburton's team, the Sacramento Kings, they're one of the worst teams in the West. So that is worth noting. But I really just think that Halliburton's offense and just his efficiency is really it's really good for a rookie. I don't see it very often. The guy shooting 43% from three, 50% from
Mm-hmm.
two. You don't see
Mm-hmm.
that every day from a rookie. So, I think that's worth noting, and I think that's why I have him slightly ahead of LaMelo.
Yeah, I get that. And look, these awards sometimes become too much about who has the better stats. But I
That's
look at
true.
LaMelo Ball, and other than maybe his offensive rating, LaMelo Ball has more points, more rebounds, more assists. His team is more successful
Slightly.
this season. I mean, for me, it's pretty. It seems like it just and just the eye test, right? LaMelo Ball is
Mm.
out there impacting the game, in my opinion, a lot more than Tyrese Halliburton. LaMelo Ball, I could say, is one of the three most important players to the Charlotte Hornets' success this season. I'm not talking about future years. I'm talking about this year. It's probably him, Gordon Hayward, and maybe
Terry
Terry
Rozier.
Rozier. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think those three are the reason why Charlotte is right now the 7th seed in the East and a 500 team. The Sacramento Kings are god awful. Halliburton doesn't start. He's a good offensive player, but with that being said, he's still averaging less points per game. I get it; his shooting percentage is a little bit
Yeah.
higher, but LaMelo's playing against the starting competition. Halliburton's playing against reserves more often than not. And again, I think it's hard to pass up on the team success that the Charlotte Hornets are having within one season of drafting LaMelo Ball and obviously signing Gordon Hayward, which has made a difference too.
Yeah, and I get that. I get LaMelo's doing more, and he's doing it with the starters on the floor. But I think it's important to note that Halliburton is playing with the starters. He's not starting, right? He's not starting, but he is playing with the starters. He's averaging more minutes per game, Trevor, than LaMelo is this season. Halliburton's averaging a little over 30 minutes per game, whereas LaMelo's averaging about 28. So it's a negligible difference, but it still shows that Halliburton is playing quite a bit. Like he's not really playing in like a straight reserve bench role, right?
Okay.
He is playing with the starters while he does, first come in with the bench unit. He does rotate back in late in the third and middle of the fourth with the starters, at least in a lot of the games. I know he's made a multitude of clutch shots, but it's hard to make a lot of clutch shots when your team's this bad. And I get that LaMelo's team is winning, but to me, Trevor, with this week of a draft class, I don't really think that it's fair to pin winning on these rookies. I just, even LaMelo, I get he's helping the team, but I think the addition of Gordon Hayward to Terry Rozier and Devontae
Mm-hmm.
Graham, right? And these are solid players on Charlotte in a weak East, right? The Kings are in the West,
Mm-hmm.
much more difficult, and they have a terrible head coach, terrible defense, just a bad team outside of
Mm-hmm.
Buddy Hield and De'Aaron Fox. So I think the
Okay.
situations are worth talking about, but at the end of the day, I just think Halliburton as a rookie, his efficiency isn't to be ignored. So at the very least, I think it's a very tight race.
Yeah. Unfortunately, not a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people feel like LaMelo is
That
running away with
is,
it,
it's true.
but we will see, Ryan. Moving
Mm-hmm.
on to our second award of the night, I want to talk about Defensive Player of the Year. And this might come a little bit of a shock to certain individuals, but I actually have Miles Turner for Defensive Player
Mm,
of the Year. He's averaging 3.5 blocks per game, which I believe leads the NBA. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that
I
is
think that
easily
is.
leads the NBA.
Yeah.
He's averaging over a steal a game, and he has a defensive rating of 106.7, which is second highest in the league to Joel Embiid at 107.7 and equal to Giannis Antetokounmpo's defensive rating of 106.7. So for me, Miles Turner kind of flying under the radar. A little bit of a spread big guy. He can shoot the three really well. But on the defensive end, he is a menace. He leads the league in blocks, as I mentioned. He affects shots even when he isn't blocking them. He's averaging over a steal a game too, which is excellent for a big man. And on a Indiana team that's been beat up a little bit this year and hasn't shined as much as we thought they might, I think he's been a bright spot for them. And his defense has certainly contributed to their, I guess, low end playoff success as of right now.
Yeah, no, he's definitely playing very well. I will say that he's definitely a contender this year for Defensive Player of the Year. Miles Turner is, but I actually have someone more traditional in mind, and it's kind of a boring pick, and I apologize for that. But I think Rudy Gobert deserves this award this year, and I do want to say I think if Anthony Davis was healthy, I think he deserves the award. But because he's not healthy, because he won't have played
Mm-hmm.
for I think Trevor, what it will be, it'll be a couple months, right, when he comes
And
back,
he's already
like
missed a
for.
third of the season. He's missed 10 or 11
Yeah,
games.
yeah, exactly. So if he was healthy, I think Davis would be Defensive Player of the Year because he does lead the NBA in defensive rating. He does lead the NBA in defensive win shares. He's the only player in the NBA to have under a 100 defensive rating, meaning he allows less than 100 points per 100 possessions, which is unbelievably good, which is it's unreal. But speaking of Rudy Gobert, who I think deserves the award, he's already won the award twice in 2017 and 2018. And if he were to win this year, he'd be only the fourth player in NBA history to win 3 Defensive Player of the Awards. And I think that he deserves it because he, after Anthony Davis, is second in defensive rating at 100.2, right? So he's very close behind Anthony Davis, and he's second in defensive win shares. He's also second in blocks per game behind Miles Turner, I suppose, at 2.6 blocks per game, which is his career high. So he's still, upping his game every year on the defensive end. As an elite rim protector already, I think that that proves to me that he's staying at an elite level. And for me, Trevor, before I just finish up here, I want to say that Defensive Player of the Year to me is the one award, and you can say these for all the awards, Trevor, but for me, it's the one award that you really need to the eye test is so important because defense is so hard to quantify as a statistic. You see defensive rating, and it's like, okay, that's great. But a lot of most people don't really know what that means, and they don't really know how impactful, right? It's just hard to picture, hard to understand and really determine who's the best from it. So, this is the one award that I think is very important is important to look at in person and see like how many shots are altered, not necessarily blocked. How many times are players driving and they have to alter their form when they're shooting. So it's all these little things. But if I'm just looking at solid big men, guys who have historically been great, I think Rudy Gobert is the guy this year. I think he's put up better numbers than he ever has, and I think that he deserves the award this year.
It's an interesting argument. I will say Myles Garrett's averaging more blocks and more steals per game. I guess his defensive rating is a little bit lower than Rudy Gobert's per 100 possessions.
Yeah, he's winning less.
But as you said, defense is hard to quantify. And it is fair to say that the Jazz are the number one team defensive team in the NBA as well, which I'm sure Rudy Gobert plays a big part in that. With that being said, Ryan, time to move on to our next award. We've seen zero agreement between the first two. I'm a little bit surprised. I thought we'd get Rookie of the Year. But moving on to Most Improved Player of the Year, I'll hand it off to you to give your guy.
Yeah, so when I'm going to Most Improved Player of the Year, Trevor, for me, this award comes down to, obviously who made the biggest jump. And to me, there's one guy, and people are going to laugh. Trevor's going to laugh, but I really think that this guy has to get some recognition, okay? And he's a shooting guard for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
For this award, he should.
Colin Sexton should get some recognition for this award because, I've said it time and time again. I'll say it again. He's made some of the biggest jumps year over year that I've seen in the NBA, Trevor. From year one, averaging 16 points a game on 43% shooting, to year two, averaging 21 points a game on 47% shooting, to this year, Trevor, averaging 24 points a game on 49% shooting. He keeps improving. He keeps getting better. His 3-point percentage increased by 2% from 38 to 40. His 2-point percentage increased by 1.5 percentage. He's averaging a career high in assists at 4.5 a game, a career high in steals at 1.2. I mean, he's improving in nearly every category, with free throw percentage being like the one category slightly regressed in. He's been sensational this year, and I'm not one to argue that he should be an all-star or anything. That's really debatable and not really an argument I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to say that he improves every year. He's proven it time and time again. And I think the jump from year 2 to year 3, it has been substantial. And I think one other thing I want to point out is, offensive box plus minus. This is a stat that is an advanced statistic. It's basically like, how do you impact the floor, right? How does your team play on the offensive end when you're on the floor? In his first year, it was negative 1.4. So the team was really bad, a lot worse when he was on the floor. Now it's up to 1.5. So he's totally flipped the script on the offensive end, improved mightily on that end of the floor, and he's become a valuable asset for the Cleveland Cavaliers on the offensive end. So, really, Trevor, I just think that his improvement each year has been amazing, and I think that he has to be rewarded for that. So I wanted to, I think he's my favorite for this award so far this year.
Yeah, I kind of figured you would go with him, and there is definitely an argument for Colin Sexton, but I think it's most improved, not who's improved. And I think for me, this award, again, is fairly obvious in terms of most improved player, and that
Really?
is Jeremy Grant. It's not even close in my
Oh,
personal opinion.
oh no, I disagree.
It's hard to disagree here, but
Okay.
anyways, in his career, he was averaging 10 points a game, right? He's been a glorified role player his whole career. He's never been anything more than the fourth option.
Sure.
This year for Detroit, he's taken a huge step. He's averaging 23 points per game. He's doubled his assist numbers, which weren't very high to begin with, but they've been doubled. And he's added an extra 1.3 rebounds per game. His shooting has not improved as much, but that's because he's the first option. He's seeing everybody's best defender now, and he is the guy to game plan for because Detroit has nobody else. They got rid of Blake Griffin, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, traded Derrick Rose. So now it's basically Jeremy Grant and a bunch of rookies. And for me, he has played excellently this year. As I mentioned, he's doubled his points per game, doubled his assists. And obviously, he's the man now, and he's seeing everybody's best defender. He's seeing everybody's hardest coverage. And I think that's hard to ignore. And I get the argument for Colin Sexton, but I think the one flaw is Sexton's improvement has been over the course of these last 2 years, right? He improved a lot last year, and he's improved more this year. I think in terms of a 1 year jump from last year to this year, Jeremy Grant has made the biggest jump.
Yeah, see, I'm gonna disagree with you. I just wanted to say one thing, Trevor, if that's okay, if you don't mind if I
Mm-hmm.
just say something in regards to this. I want to point out, I feel like choosing players who switch teams in the offseason for most improved player is kind of it's tough for me to do. And here's why. Because players like Jeremy Grant is a perfect example. These guys go from role players on elite playoff championship contending teams to the star player or the second option, right, on one of the worst teams in the NBA. And that's exactly what Jeremy Grant did. He went from one of the best teams in the NBA as a fourth option to perhaps the worst team in the NBA this year in the Detroit Pistons, and he's the number one option now, right? And obviously his percentages were going to drop off. They all have. And to me, Troy's pointing
Well,
out,
they've dropped off by 2%
I'm
from, sorry, 3%
mhm,
regular field goal wise.
six.
He's improved his 3-point shooting, and his free throw shooting has exponentially gotten better.
I mean, his 2 point percentage is lowered by 6%, which again, I'm not here to argue that because I expected that. When you become the number one option, especially
Exactly.
when you haven't done it your whole career. See, Sexton's done it pretty much his whole
Exactly.
career, so that's different. Jeremy Grant hasn't done his whole career. He needs to learn, right? He needs to learn how to be the number one option, take better shots. See, I'm not here to argue that. I'm trying to say that I think that when a guy switches teams like that, it's really hard to give him the most improved player award because a lot of that improvement, Trevor, comes from having more opportunity. So when I think you get a lot more opportunity on a different team, it's hard to really tell, like, okay, how much of that was him switching teams and how much of that was actually him getting better. So for me, I just have trouble giving an award to a guy who switches teams like that. And that's why I
I
prefer to give
guess,
it to
but I
Sexton.
mean, plenty of guys switch teams every season, and
Mm-hmm.
there are other examples of Jeremy Grant where role players go to or role players on a championship team go
Mm-hmm.
to a worse team, and you'd think they become the man, right? I think of Danilo Gallinari, who was on a playoff team last year, goes to Atlanta this year. We
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen any spike in his game, despite I would say increased opportunity. Yes, they have Trae Young, but increased opportunity. And I think Jeremy Grant, again, it's a one season award. It's not about the development of the guy over the last 3 years. It's not about I think these are all distractions. The point is Jeremy Grant has improved his game. You can see it on the court. He has obviously doubled his points per game. He's seeing everybody's best defender now, and he's expanding his offensive game. All we saw in Denver was an athletic guy who can occasionally hit a three. Now he's putting the ball on the floor. He's creating shots off the dribble. He's creating shots off the pass. And again, his percentages are suffering a tiny bit. But again, the award shouldn't be determined on efficiency and your strictly shooting percentage, right? Because there's obviously other
It's fair.
circumstances that contribute to shooting percentage. So for me, Colin Sexton is a decent choice. I wouldn't necessarily pick him because he's also on a pretty bad team. I mean, team success for him is not that's a tough thing to argue for, but I guess when you're arguing against the Detroit Pistons or arguing against the Detroit Pistons, it
Yeah.
kind of works in this case. But for me, the single year jump for Jeremy Grant is what has to be taken note of, regardless of these other distractions of him moving teams and whatnot.
All right. Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I think it'll be interesting. I mean, it'll certainly be interesting to see who the favorite is for this award. I can almost assure you it won't be Colin Sexton. He's continually disrespected across the league, so he probably won't win this award. But,
Oh my
we'll see. We'll
God.
see who does. We'll see who the favorite is. Maybe Jordan Clarkson. He's another guy who's been thrown around a lot as a
Mhm.
really improved player this year. But, Trevor, with that, I wanted to move on to our next, our next topic, our next award here. And this is an interesting one. I am really curious to see who you have for Coach of the Year this year, Trevor,
Mhm.
because Coach of the Year, I would say there's not an obvious one. I mean, there's definitely a few outliers, a few, top contenders, but there's not an
Mhm.
obvious choice. So I wanted to hear what you thought.
For me, it is an obvious choice, and it's actually the most obvious choice of the night, and that's
Okay.
Monty Williams of the Phoenix Suns. And it's not even
Oh,
close.
okay.
It's absolutely not even close. I get the argument for Quinn Snyder, but I mean, this guy, I guess this is a midseason. Midseason, it's close, but Quinn Snyder has done this year after year. The Jazz have consistently been a 4, 5, 6 seed in the West. They're obviously doing a little bit better this year. But I look at Monty Williams, and in a year, or I should say maybe 2 seasons, he
Yes.
has taken the Phoenix Suns from the joke of the NBA to the current 2 seed in the Western Conference, right? That kind of turnaround is unheard of. And we look at the jump just from last year before the bubble. We were 26 and 39 before the bubble. Obviously, we had a huge run, went 8-0, won some games because teams benched some players. But to build off a below 500 season and now in the next year turn this team so far into the 2 seed in the West, that's hard to deny. That kind of turnaround does not happen very often, and I think it takes a very special personality and a very special coach to have that happen so quickly. And I get the argument for some other guys. I guess Doc Rivers is in there, but Philadelphia's team foundation was there. I don't really think he turned anything around.
Yeah.
I guess you could throw in. I mean, I've seen what's his face, Billy Donovan, I guess, get thrown around, but for
Tom
me,
Thibodeau,
Chicago,
maybe.
Tom Thibodeau is another one. For me, Tom Thibodeau is interesting, but I think for Billy Donovan, they haven't won enough games yet, and they
Yeah.
do have a couple nice young pieces. But I guess I'm just looking at what the Suns have done and how far this team has come under Monty Williams in a year and a half, and that's just hard to ignore. So for me, Coach of the Year as of right now is Monty.
Well, all right. I mean, listen, I can't argue with Monty Williams as, coach of the year because he definitely is in contention. He's definitely up there at this current moment in time. I can't say he doesn't deserve it because as of now, he does. As of now, he definitely does. But for me, I was going to go with someone different. I was going to go with the person that you mentioned earlier in your explanation for Monty Williams, and that's Quinn Snyder. I think Quinn Snyder deserves it this year. I think he deserves it right now. I think he will deserve it by the end of the season. And here's why. I think that, sure, the Jazz have been good for years now. They've been good for 2 or 3 years. They've had Donovan Mitchell. Ever since they got Donovan Mitchell, they've been a playoff team. But they haven't been the playoff team. They haven't been the best, right? And they're not just the best, Trevor. They're not just number one, right? They're number one by multiple games in the grueling Western Conference. They're two and a
Mm-hmm.
half games up on the 2 seed in the West halfway through the season. To be
Wait, Ryan,
that's a,
who's the 2 seed in the West? Who's
Oh, the
two?
Phoenix Suns are, and that contributes to my point in saying Monty Williams definitely deserves this award. But Quinn Snyder deserves this award more because his Jazz are more successful. They're on an absolute tear right now, and they're just absolutely elite, Trevor, on both ends of the floor, and I can't ignore that. While the Phoenix Suns are a good team, they're a great story so far this year. They're a pretty average team on defense, a very good offensive team, a pretty average team on defense, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, every team has weaknesses, but the Utah Jazz so far this year, Trevor, don't really have many weaknesses. I mean, they're fourth in defensive rating and second in offensive rating. I mean, I've talked about this at length in previous podcasts, but this team
Mm-hmm.
is a force to be reckoned with, at least in the regular season. And since Coach of the Year and all these awards are regular season awards, I think that just as of now, you can't pass up on giving Coach of the Year to Quinn Snyder. And in particular, how he's improved his players. Rudy Gobert, as I said, blocks at a career high, contending for another
Okay.
award. Donovan Mitchell playing the best season of his career, I would argue. Jordan Clarkson, best season of his career. He's got guys on his team playing much, much better, improving efficiency, and it's
Mm-hmm.
affecting the entire team. So I think he deserves the award, but you can make the argument for Monty Williams any day of the week.
Yeah, you make a pretty compelling argument, especially with the part about developing players. I think that's definitely something Quinn Snyder has absolutely done. He's developed Donovan Mitchell his whole career. He's developed
Mhm.
Rudy Gobert. He's definitely developed guys like Jordan Clarkson,
Mhm.
even other role players like George Niang and Joe Ingles. Quinn Snyder's
Yeah.
really developed their games as well. So you do make a very compelling argument for Quinn Snyder. For me, though, again, it gets a little too statty, right? We look at, oh, the Jazz are top five in this and top five in that, number one in this.
Yeah.
Phoenix and Utah and Phoenix are number two in the NBA in record, right? And I think looking at where both these teams were expected to finish at the start of the season, well, that's actually not a fair argument because probably both were expected to finish around the same spot. But I look
Mhm.
at um, the overall improvement of where Monty Williams took over the Suns to where they are now. And I think for me, Quinn Snyder's been, and we already know about Quinn Snyder, right? We've seen what he can do. So for me,
Yeah.
he hasn't been the best coach this individual season. And I look at Monty Williams and I look at where the Suns finished last year versus where he has them this year. And in that time period, I think he has been the best coach. But Quinn Snyder, again, has done a fantastic job. Little disclaimer: the Suns did beat the Jazz head to head, so we're 1-0 against them. This was early in the season, but just thought
Oh
I'd throw that
man.
out there for the argument.
Can
But I think it's hard to go. I think it's going to end up being one of these two guys at the end of the year, regardless. It might depend on who finishes higher in
probably.
the Western Conference standings, so we'll see.
Can I say one thing real quick? I just find it
Yeah,
funny before we move on. I find it funny. You and I are making opposite arguments from our NFL Coach of the Year arguments. Sean McDermott was a guy who you were arguing for, and he had previous success with Buffalo in previous years. And I was arguing for Kevin Stefanski, a guy who came in and turned around the Cleveland in one season. It's similar to Monty Williams and Kevin Stefanski. These guys turn their programs around, their teams around real quick, right? And all of a sudden they ascended real far up. And McDermott and Snyder have done it. They've had success in previous years, and then all of a sudden they vaulted up to elite level. And I just find it funny that we kind of switch roles on that. It shows you both coaches deserved it in both leagues, right? Both coaches definitely
right,
deserve it, and they're
right.
both going to be in the running. So we will see who, if anyone pulls ahead. We'll see if anyone pulls ahead. But
Betting
Trevor,
favorite is Quinn Snyder. Just wanted to throw that out there. But Ryan, yeah, go ahead,
there you go.
continue.
Yeah, no, I was just going to move us on to our final award, or NBA award of the night, and that's MVP, Trevor. That's MVP.
MVP,
Um, and if you don't mind, I was just going to go ahead with this. And now,
take it away.
this is a tough one, Trevor, because this year the MVP is not really obvious.
No,
If I'm
it's
going to be
not. A lot
honest,
of guys could win it.
certainly a lot of guys can win it. I'd say more so than ever before, at least in
Mm-hmm.
recent memory for myself. I can't remember a time where it was more
Mm-hmm.
competitive than this. And I'm going to go with one that maybe people aren't expecting. I'm going to go with a guy playing for the Denver Nuggets, a center by the name of Nikola Jokic.
Oh,
I'm going to go with Nicole.
interesting.
I'm going to go with Nikola Jokic for MVP. And there's many reasons I could argue why. Right? Obviously, he's an elite player. But I just wanted to go through a few things. First, the Nuggets started off the season slow. We all know why. They took a beating in the bubble. They were exhausted, but they battled back. And Jokic in particular, and Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., but they all battled back to become the 6th seed into the break. I think they're the 6th seed right now in the West going into the All-Star break. And Nikola Jokic is the leader of this team. Make no mistake about it. He's the top dog. He's the guy. And I just wanted to go through why he's so good this year. He's averaging 27 points a game this season compared to just under 20 last year. A dramatic increase. He's
Mm-hmm.
shooting over 60% from inside the three-point line, Trevor. Absolutely sensational.
That is
42% from
sensational.
the three-point line. 11 boards, 9 assists, almost 2 steals a game. He's just filling up the stat sheet. And Trevor, you're right. Numbers can tell you most of the story. They can never tell you the whole story, right? But if you watch Nikola Jokic, you can see the impact he has on the team every night. You can see the different way he approaches each game, depending on how teams are guarding him, depending on how teams are defending the rest of his teammates, right? If they're defending the rest of his teammates, and leaving him in a one-on-one situation, or if he can get a switch, he will score a lot. He will score as much as he's allowed. But if he's getting double teamed constantly, he's having a hard time getting his shot, he'll pass it up. He's averaging almost 9 assists a game, Trevor. I mean, he knows how to pass
Mm-hmm.
the ball. One of the best, if not the best, big men passer in the NBA. So, I think just the ability that he has on the offensive end, he can pretty much do it all. Pretty much everything, Trevor, on the offensive end and the defensive end. He's also really, really good. I wouldn't say he's at the elite level of Gobert and Anthony Davis, but he's pretty close, Trevor. He's pretty close. He is definitely a presence, a force to be reckoned with on the defensive end. And especially, in terms of creating turnovers. Again, the steals, almost 2 a game. Blocks, only 0.6 per game. But, blocks don't always tell the whole story. Altering shots, altering the way people take shots is almost more important than blocks themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I just think he has all the numbers behind him. His team's playing much better, going into the break. And he's improving year over year. And it's gotten to a point, Trevor, where we can't ignore anymore the numbers he's putting up, the impact he has on his team night in and night out. So I think right now that he deserves MVP.
Yeah, he was honestly a guy I really almost put down. I was between him and this other guy,
Okay.
and I'm actually going to go with Joel Embiid for
Mm.
MVP this season.
Oh,
He is top 5 in the NBA. He's second in the NBA in points per game, top 5 in the NBA in rebounds per game. He's averaging a block and a half a game, over a steal a game. And I just talk about what one player, who has, I guess it's hard because we think about one
mm-hmm.
player that impacts his team more than any other player.
Yeah.
And for me, Joel Embiid is the best offensive and best defensive player on the Philadelphia 76ers. You talk about Jokic not being quite an elite defender. I would argue Joel Embiid is up there in terms of elite defenders.
Mm.
He's an elite offensive player. He has greatly improved his three-point shooting this year. He's now 41% on the season. He's an
Wow.
85% free throw shooter.
Mm.
And you talk about Jokic. Jokic has definitely improved his three-point shooting too. Um, but I like Embiid's offensive arsenal a little bit more than Jokic's in terms of scoring. I think he has more post moves than Jokic, and I think he has a little bit. It's close though. I think Jokic is more of a catch and shoot kind of guy. He'll make threes if he's open, whereas
Mm.
I think Embiid is a little bit better at making contested shots. But again, very close. And you talk about Jokic's passing because that is really critical, and sometimes assists is a bit of an underrated stat. Embiid is not quite like that. Um,
Yeah.
so where he makes up the difference is in team success, and I get it. I've always argued against the East, but Philadelphia
Wow.
is currently the number 1 seed in the East. Denver's
Mm-hmm.
number 6 in the West. Philly does have a better record than Denver by about 3 games. Not about, it is 3 games. So for me, it's really close between these two. It's honestly really close between 5 or 6 guys. You could honestly make an argument
Yeah.
for those two. LeBron's in the conversation. Kevin Durant, before he was injured, is in the conversation. Steph
Mm-hmm.
Curry's in the conversation. But for me, I think Joel Embiid, the way he's impacted the game on the offensive and defensive side, and the way he's dominating the league right now on the stat sheet, that's why I gave it to him.
Yeah, no, I mean he definitely deserves it. I was thinking about picking him as well. I just really like the way Jokic has, obviously I just love his passing ability and the way
It
he
is.
influences the team. It's second to none. But Trevor, I just want to say, it's really cool that we're talking about 2 MVP favorites who are playing the center position. Everyone
Right.
said the center position maybe a few years back was dying, and now look at it. There's 2 guys who are, pure fives, guys who can do a
Mm-hmm.
lot more than just rebound and dunk, but they are centers. They're true centers.
Right.
It's cool that we're talking about both of them for MVP. So I think
I
that's
agree.
it's kind of neat. But Trevor, I don't know if you have any other thoughts, but if you don't, I was going to move on to not an award, Trevor, but just another
This is more of our second half season outlook, real quick, before we move on to a couple other
well,
things.
yeah, well,
Or forecast, I should say.
yeah, I wanted to actually. Well, first of all, I wanted to. Did you want to talk about a surprise team this year?
Oh
Did
yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Let's do that. Good
I
call. Good
I
call.
wanted to talk about a surprise team of the year from this year. And Trevor, if you agree with me, you can jump in and just say you agree, and we can talk about it for a second. But I think this is fairly obvious. I don't think this is even remotely close. This team exceeded all expectations in the first half of the season. They did much
Are you
better
gonna
than
say what I think you're gonna
they did
say?
much better than I thought they were. The leadership of this team was better than I thought, and
Go ahead.
it's the Phoenix Suns. I mean, this team did better than I thought they were going to. I thought they were going to be a low end playoff team. I think they will be a low end playoff team still. I think they'll fall to the 5 or the 6 seed, but I can't ignore the facts that they've played really well so far this year at the 2 seed, and I mean they're winning games they weren't supposed to win. They're beating the Lakers, right? They're beating the Jazz. They're beating the Clippers. They're beating the teams that are supposed to beat them. So when I see that, I can't ignore it. And really, Trevor, there's some other teams that have surprised me this year, but I mean, the Suns, they surprised me the most. As simple as that. So I don't know if you agreed. If you want to just say a
Wow.
quick thing about it.
Ryan, I've never liked you more until right now. And you hit the nail on
Cheers.
the head with the Phoenix Suns. They have exceeded expectations more so than any other team. And I think we chose surprise team in terms of like a pleasant surprise, not a negative
Yeah.
surprise. You could have gone either way, but I think it's more interesting if you go with a pleasant surprise.
Mm.
And yeah, you're right. The Phoenix Suns have exceeded expectations. They exceeded my expectations. I thought they were going to be a 5 or 6 seed as well in the playoffs. I had them 6 in my standings preseason.
Mm.
They are currently second. They have the second best record in the entire NBA. They have beaten all the top teams in the East. They have beaten the Lakers and the Jazz, who are the other top 3 teams in the West. And you're right. They're better than people thought. They've surprised people. They've surprised me. They've surprised you. And it's as simple as that. I think there's a few other arguments. I think the Knicks you could definitely make an argument for in terms of a pleasant surprise. You could definitely make the argument for a Chicago Bulls team.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the success that the Suns have had is hard to look by. It's hard to pass up on. And the fact that, as you mentioned, they are in the die-hard West and they are the 2 seed right now, halfway through the season, is impressive, and it's definitely a surprise. And I think you finally got something right, Ryan. Our first agreement of the night, and it's the
Thank
first
you.
right answer. It's the first right answer you've had, so I'm impressed.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. Well, I'm hoping at least, if I can give the Phoenix Suns some respect, I can get Colin Sexton some respect from you. So, maybe you can return the favor someday. I'm hoping maybe sometime put some respect on his name.
He's a good young offensive player on a bad team.
All right. Well, thank you. I mean, that's better than nothing, I guess. But Trevor, we can move on to something that, moving on to shifting over to the second half of the NBA season. And this is something that you wanted to talk about briefly, which is a team that you want to watch out for to start the second half of the year. A team that you think maybe underperformed in the first half and you think is going to make a push going into the second half of the season. I don't know if you had anyone specific in mind, Trevor, but yeah, I mean, take it away.
Well, I was going to say this team, but I just learned a little bit something about Marcus Smart. But I'm going to go with the Boston Celtics. And I think they definitely underperformed in the first half of the season, but I also think they have a really, really good young core. I have screwed up multiple times on this podcast and said Marcus Smart's going to come back. We'll see if he comes back. He suffered a torn calf against LA in late January.
Wow.
So I would assume a torn calf is not quite a torn Achilles. So I would think by May. I actually don't know how long a torn calf injury will last for.
Probably quite.
I can look that up real quick. I bet it's
I would assume it's probably multiple months if I had. To,
oh yeah,
100%.
So he's already been out about a month and a half. We'll see if they get him back. But I think Boston has definitely underachieved, and I think they are going to surprise people in the second half of the season. They're already back up to 4th in the East. I think are they 5th?
I think they're 5th.
They're 4th or 5th in the East.
They are 4th. They are 4th. They are 4th in the
right.
East.
So there you go. I think I think you're gonna see some separation from the top 4. I think Boston's gonna string together some wins. They have Jason Tatum. They have Jaylen Brown. I think Kemba Walker had a couple nice games before the All-Star break. And if they can get guys like Tristan Thompson and Marcus Smart back and healthy, I think this is still a relatively deep team and a very talented team. And I think this is a team that can make an Eastern Conference Finals. They did it last year. They played Miami tough for 6 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, ultimately losing. And they didn't lose anybody, critical. They lost Enes Kanter, but he's not, that important. So for me, they didn't quite play to the level that they can play at. I think Tatum and Jaylen Brown have had a good year, but I think they can play even better. But I think the key for their success, and we said it last time, is Kemba Walker, right? He's been struggling all season. He did have a really solid game, I believe, their last game before the All-Star break against – it might have been the Clippers.
It was the Clippers.
I think it was the Clippers, yes. Where he had a very solid shooting night, and he kind of led them to victory in that game. We'll see if he can carry on after a little bit of rest for the second half of the season. But I would look out for Boston because I still think they can make a run in the East, and they have a very, very talented core.
I mean, listen, there's no doubt Boston has a talented core. I just, I haven't really seen them put it together yet, and I haven't seen them put it together yet this first half of the season. With Marcus Smart out, I think it makes it tough because he is an invaluable asset for that team. So I think it's all dependent on when he comes back or if he comes back. But Trevor, talking about a team that I think, to watch out for the second half of the season is a team that people have disrespected this year, Trevor, including you, a
Who?
lot of people have, and that's the Miami Heat, Trevor. That's the Miami
Oh,
Heat.
okay.
This team has been disrespected, and they made the finals last year. I can't stress this enough. This team is essentially identical from what it was last season, and they were
They haven't been
sensational.
healthy, that's fair.
But because Trevor, I remember, I looked back, I was curious to see, what our thoughts were and what other people's thoughts were about the Miami Heat last season, midway through. And I said, watch out for this team. They could make the Eastern
You were
Conference
right.
Finals.
You were
They could
right.
even make the NBA Finals. And they did. And people continually said on ESPN, on a lot of the large networks. And, I'm not trying to, diss you, but you said it as well. I mean,
I
you're
did. I
like,
did.
a lot of people are like, I don't think they can beat Boston. I don't think they can beat Milwaukee. I don't think they could beat Toronto. And look who they beat. They marched right through the East, and it really wasn't even a challenge for them, particularly Milwaukee. Wasn't even a challenge for them. So I
Hmm.
think people have to remember, how good this team is. And you're right; they have not been healthy. They have not been healthy this whole season. Particularly, Goran Dragic has missed, I believe, 14 games. You have uh, Jimmy Butler missing like 14 games as well. A bunch of guys have missed double-digit games. Avery Bradley's missed a bunch of games.
Hmm.
You have a bunch of your role players, a bunch of your stars, even Jimmy Butler and Goran Dragic, missing games, a lot of games, and it's tough to put up a really solid record, even in the weaker East. But I think this team is a team to look out for in the second half of the year. I think they're going to put the pedal to the metal. I think they're really going to step it up. I think that they're going to show people why they deserve to be in conversation to make the NBA Finals another year, a second year in a row.
Right. You make an interesting point about the Miami Heat, and I'm actually looking at the Eastern Conference standings right now, and I think to myself, the East is built a lot like how the West was last year when the bubble came around, right?
Mm.
Excuse me. The Lakers, the Clippers, the Nuggets, they kind of had separation. They were the top three. And then it got really muddy in the middle half and the back half of the playoffs. And I look at the East, and Boston's 2 games above 500. They're the 4 seed. New York's 1 game above 500. Miami's 500. Charlotte's 1 game below 500. Toronto's 1 game below 500.
Mm.
Or 2 games below 500. Chicago's 2 games below 500. Indiana's 3 games below 500. Right. So I think the back half or the middle half, the middle part of the East, where it's going to go from like 4 to 8 in playoff seeding, is going to be very interesting. And if I'm a team like the Miami Heat, the 4 seed is in sight. They're only 1 game back of the Boston Celtics. And as I mentioned, the New York Knicks are in between them. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shapes out. And I definitely think as Miami gets healthier, they're going to make a run at that top four. I would presume we're going to have fans coming back by the time the playoffs get around in the summer. Maybe not full capacity, but partial capacity,
Yeah.
and it might become a factor to start. It might become important again to be one of those top 4 seeds, or at least more important. So we'll see how it all bends out. But I do agree they got hot at the end of the before the All-Star break, and they're going to get healthy, right? They're going to get guys like Goran Dragic and Avery Bradley back and playing consistent minutes, which I think is going to be huge for their depth and rotation. But yeah, you make a good point. I think Boston, Miami, 2 interesting teams to look out for because those were the 2 teams in the Eastern Conference Finals last season.
Yes, they were, and it really does feel like a while ago, but that's besides the point. Moving on, Trevor, to the final topic, or the second last topic of our evening here, and this is
Mm-hmm.
something that we can talk about pretty briefly, but I just wanted our thoughts on this real quick, and that's Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin, got cut or bought out by the Detroit Pistons. And he's now going to go. Luckily he got out of Detroit, and now he's going
Yeah.
to go to the Brooklyn Nets. Trevor, he's going to go to the Brooklyn Nets. He's going to join that already elite team and just add to that bench, add to their the talent. And I just wanted your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on it. Was this an impactful signing? How will it change this team? I think it'll be better, worse. What are your thoughts?
I feel bad for Blake Griffin because he's a shell of himself. He has evolved his game a little bit, to be fair, right? When he was in
Mm-hmm.
Lob City with the Clippers, he was a high flying, athletic, elite dunker. And now he's become a lot more of a shooter. I shouldn't say shooter because he's not a great shooter, but he's evolved his
He's
game to
solid.
where he can't really dunk anymore. So he's got to make threes and make twos and make fall away jump shots and stuff like that.
Mm.
So, with all that being said, I don't think he's a game changing signing, right? if you thought the Nets were better than the Lakers, or if you thought the Lakers were better than the Nets, or vice versa, I don't think Blake Griffin going to the Nets changes that all that much. I do think the one interesting thing they can do with Blake Griffin is they can play small ball and they can have Blake Griffin play the 5, which I think would be very interesting with Kevin Durant at the 4, Joe Harris at the 3, Kyrie and Harden at the 1 and 2, and bring in guys like DeAndre Jordan, Jeff Green, and Landry Shamet off the bench. So I do think he will fill a roster spot. They had 2 roster spots available. They weren't very deep as is. They only probably play 8 guys significant minutes, 7 guys significant minutes. So I definitely think he will be nice, a little bit of added depth for this team. But at the end of the day, he's a shell of himself. He is not the same player he used to be. But I do think playing him as the small ball 5 will be interesting come playoff time.
Yeah, 100%. I do agree with you. I don't think it has a big impact on the overall team. But, I think it's important to note this team, obviously, right, with 3-star elite players, their bench was terrible, Trevor. It was really bad. When they got rid of Taurean Prince and Jared Allen, for getting James Harden, and LeVert. That's 3 guys right there who are high. They are high-end bench depth, right? Those are high-end players on your bench, all 3 of them. And for you to get rid of all 3, that's going to hurt. So getting Blake Griffin, while obviously he's not what he was, his name is bigger than what he is. You're right. It sounds like a bigger signing than it actually is, but he does help them on the bench. You're right. They did not have another big guy. Him at the 5 is great, some size, right? Even though he's a shell of himself, there's some size there. He can still run the floor halfway decently, and he can hit the 3. I think he's shooting around 36%, so he can hit the 3 at a decent clip this year, which is a big improvement over previous years. And he needed to. He needed to change his game. So I don't think this had much of an impact on this team as a whole, but I do think it helps, shore up their bench depth, especially in case of an injury. I think he helps fill a hole. So I think it was a good signing, something that, for like the vet minimum, which I'm sure it was, it couldn't hurt.
5.9 million, and that's considering Detroit owes him like 30 million in dead cap. I think the Nets got a decent deal out of it.
Yeah. Okay. So never mind.
Or a buyout fee, I should say.
Okay. Yeah. So regardless, he's getting paid a lot less than what he was, and I guess they got a solid deal. I don't think it changes much, but it does help their bench depth. So, but Trevor, with that, I think that just about wraps it up. I think that just about does it. And this is an NBA heavy podcast, but as we said, next week's gonna be NFL heavy, and obviously we have the March Madness special coming out with March Madness right around the corner. So Trevor, a lot of exciting things coming up next week, and it'll be fun. So we hope you all enjoy it, and we'll be back next week with another episode. So we can see you guys then.